think, as it always happens with last panel, I think there is a bit of a fatigue and people must have gone out to air themselves. But we will still start. What we're going to do is this. We'll have one speaker who will kind of set the tone, and then we're going to open it for discussion instead of making individual comments, if that's all right with the panel.
Yeah, makes good sense.
So what I would suggest is to make it more interesting and to wake up people who might be sleeping in the audience. It may be interesting if anybody jumps in at any point of time in the discussion, and that will make it lively. And in the end, we'll try and see that we don't go too far away from what we are discussing. Now, the complexity of social reality in developing countries especially is of a kind where there can't be any prescription which is acceptable or understood by everybody. We have, since the time we started this conference, more or less accepted that competition is good for inclusiveness. And now what we're going to see is how do you enforce competition to achieve that objective of inclusiveness or equity in a society which may have tremendous diversities in terms of class and access. If you look at India, for instance, close to 300 million people are still living in poverty. And that's a very large number in terms of percentages. It may not look that large because India's population is 1.2 billion, but in absolute terms, it's a very large number. These people live in poverty and deprivation, not only in terms of economic deprivation, but they have deprivation of all kinds. And when Pradeep was speaking about SDGs, the first thing that comes to our mind is that not only in terms of the quantity of availability of services, but also quality of availability of services is very disparate. So in a situation of this nature, if we are going to create a competition in the market in a manner that it leads to inclusiveness, then what is the manner in which you can enforce it? How should it be enforced? And I think that is something that we need to discuss a bit in this session. One fact, of course, is if you look at India, for instance, Competition Commission sits in Delhi, New Delhi. Now imagine a group of consumers who are poor, who find there is a problem first to identify in terms of competition, whether there is something that is happening which is leading to inequality in their lives, which is non-competitive, but also in terms of their access. So how do they come and get that access? Are able to enunciate their whole problem in a manner that the Competition Commission is able to look at it. So these are a very large issues that we need to look at, and I would therefore first invite Professor Lianis to make a small presentation, after which we will throw it open for discussion.
Thank you very much, Chair, and also like to thank...
Hello, thank you very much, Chair. I also like to thank Katz and Pradeep and Ujjwal for inviting me to this event. What I would like to do in my 7 minutes of discussion, and please interrupt me if I go further than that, is to a little bit set somehow the broader perspective of what we mean by inclusiveness in competition law. And I think one of the topics that we haven't really discussed today is, because we referred to many times to the word about inequality and the rise of inequality, but obviously inequality is a very broad concept. We can actually think of very different sorts of inequality, and we can have inequality of income, we can have inequality of wealth, we can have actually inequality of opportunities, opportunities for employment, opportunities for doing business, opportunities for happiness, let's say, or even genetic inequality in the sense that the use of gene editing or other methods of designer babies, etc., might somehow lead to intergenerational inequalities of great sort. And then when we think about inequality, we can actually think at the individual level, but we can actually also think at the group level. And we usually think about consumers and capitalists in a certain way, and what is the fair share that consumers should get out of the growth and the increase of capital. But we can also, include in this type of thinking the share of labor, for instance, versus capital, which has been going down quite significantly lately. The other thing that I think, so the first thing is, what should we equalize? What is basically, the equalizandum in a certain way that we need to equalize? And the second thing is, what are the reasons to equalize? Which I think we haven't thought about very much. Because should we have objectives, our aim to equalize everything, to provide everyone equal outcomes? But then, there's a big discussion in philosophy, which I can obviously summarize in 1 minute, where, they have even, with regards to philosophers concerning the equality of opportunity, like John Romer, for instance, where there's a lot of discussion about the fact that we might probably not compensate for inequality that comes out of the personal responsibility of the individual that has actually arrived to a situation of poverty. And that we should only compensate for what is called lack inequality. So I think it's a very broad topic, and I think we need to really be more precise about the types of inequality we're thinking about, and then the reasons actually we want that inequality to be compensated. But the second thing I wanted to say is that usually, and in our discussions today, I think it was pretty obvious, we think equality and efficiency as being somehow antagonistic between each other. And I think that comes out of a very old conception in economics. I mean, there's a very good book published 30, 40 years ago by Ocken on equality and efficiency, the big trade-off, where basically the idea is that sometimes, having inequality might sometimes be necessary for promoting efficiency. And at least there must be some kind of antagonistic relation between the two. And I think that is what has been influencing quite a lot of the discussions about equality, also with regards to competition law, and the fact that, we perceive competition law as a form of, field for technocrats, where, we are only aiming to promote efficiency, economic efficiency, and any issue with regards to equality and redistribution should come as, classic welfare economics 101 tells us, through the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics, will come out of transfers that could happen at the second stage through taxation, for instance. That could be the best way to deal with these problems, progressive taxation. So one might contrast, I think, this view with that of the British economist and game theorist Ken Binmore, who understands the the relation between equality and efficiency as complementary rather than antagonistic, both being considered as necessary conditions for the emergence of a social contract that will bring together different people by promoting a common set of understandings, allowing them to coordinate their efforts. So Binmore takes an evolutionary approach to social contract theory and advanced basically 3 levels of priority for a social contract to be internally stable. It's basically a social contract will not need any specific glue to hold, but it will hold basically on its own. And I think the first priority, according to Binmore's view, is stability. And I will actually summarize that with a concept of systemic resilience, to a certain way, which has been very much used recently. This idea that the first aim we need to have in mind is the stability of society. Then the second priority, according to Binmore, is efficiency. As each society competes with the social contracts in other societies, and being efficient, or in other words, avoiding waste, enables a specific society to compete successfully with other social groups in the game of life. And then the third priority for social contract to hold together is fairness. And this is a particularly important principle, as there may be various efficient equilibria available for possible social contracts. And in fairness, actually, is a way for the society to select one of these efficient equilibria to coordinate. So it's basically an informal equilibrium selection device. So according basically to this view, both fairness and efficiency are extremely important in order for social stability to stay. And I think this is something which is very important to have in mind in competition law enforcement. So just focusing on efficiency, we might actually get that wrong, because we will somehow forget the second important leg, which is fairness in order to ensure stability. Now, recently there has been a lot of discussion about the trade-offs, but in a more dynamic perspective. Actually, the idea is that focusing too much on prices and consumer allocative efficiency, that might somehow affect growth, and that might affect innovation. So the idea is that there should be some form of trade-off between the two, because we need all these profits to make investments for R&D and develop new products that the consumers might value in the future. And I think this type of consideration might somehow be explained by the old, a little bit idea that there is this trade-off between equity and efficiency, which has been characterizing growth theory for a long period of time. I can refer here to Lewis, to the Kuznets approach, to Soloff and Swan. But I think that this consensus is now breaking. There has been a lot of research recently, and a lot of research published by the IMF in particular and the OECD, which basically show that countries with high inequality experience shortened periods of growth, and thus faster and more durable growth is strongly correlated with lower inequality. And I'm not going to refer here to all these studies, which I explain in a paper that I'm going to be published actually in a few weeks, and it's called The Poverty of Competition Law, and which I develop different arguments in characterized by cumulative innovation or not. Secondly, there are many studies for specific sectors, for instance, the pharma sector, where actually we see that companies do not invest the majority of their profits on R&D, but prefer instead to buy their own shares so as to provide higher revenues to their management and shareholders. So to a certain extent, there's also a lot of literature concerning the amount of money that is spent on research and what type of research that is. This is not research, fundamental research. This is more about development, basically, of existing research rather than fundamental research, which is done by smaller units which are later purchased through mergers and acquisitions. So I think we should actually be more critical about this Schumpeterian trade-off argument as well. Let me just finish by sharing some ideas about what could be the implications for competition law. I think when we think about inequality, I think the first thing we need to probably care for is to enhance what has been called complex equality. And I refer here to the work of Michael Walzer. The idea actually is not to ensure that there is some form of equality of outcomes among different groups of people or among different people, despite the levels of effort and inventiveness and entrepreneurship they offer. I think the important thing is to make sure that we keep the different spheres of justice separate from each other, and we provide the possibility, do not provide the possibility, let's say, to the big and powerful in, let's say, an economy, to influence the political process or to influence the cultural process, right? And the cultural spheres of justice. Because this is basically what I think is the major issue here. So that means that we need to develop, I think, a broader perspective on what we mean by economic power. And that should not only relate to market power, but should also think about other sources of power and probably rehabilitate concepts such as relational market power or superior bargaining power, which could actually offer us a better picture about the bargaining position of the various parties. Thirdly, I think we should obviously focus on consumer well-being, and I use the term well-being rather than consumer welfare, in markets where this makes sense from a complex inequality perspective. When we know that most of the consumers or people affected will be among the lower income strata, or that monopolistic control of a specific social good may lead to the emergence of dominance that can be converted and extended more easily in other markets and social spheres outside the market exchange. Thirdly, I think we need to establish countervailing powers that may block the conversion process of monopoly power towards dominance, considering broader public interests that are essential in order to guarantee fairness and stability, even if this is at the price of some reduction in economic efficiency, such as effects on employment, in the interest of workers and the unemployed, the protection of privacy and democracy, or environmental concerns. I mean, I'm thinking about privacy, and this is kind of my last word. Yesterday there was this story at The Guardian, I don't know if you have followed, about Cambridge Analytica. This collaboration between this company and Facebook that led to one of the most massive breaches of privacy that we have seen, and that actually had influenced also the political process in the United States election, and obviously previously, I guess, with regards to Brexit. So we see there that this is an important actually effect, and this dominance in the area of, let's say, data has led to an important breach of other values that we were considered quite important for society, like, for instance, the democratic process. So from my perspective, we need to take this broader view on competition law. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think it very well makes it even more complex than what we were discussing. So therefore the question is, can competition law actually promote inclusive growth, considering that there is a tension between efficiency and equality?
Thank you very much, and at the risk of being a little pedantic, I think the topic of this particular roundtable was reforming competition enforcement for economic development. First things first, we need to parse what economic development means in our law, that is the Indian competition law. Whatever it may be, it's a law. So all the objectives of the law, the goals of the law are embedded in the law, and so therefore we cannot go beyond the law. So if the law does not allow for, and I will explain why, if the law does not allow for a redistribution mechanism through the instrument of Indian competition law, then we are limited to that extent. So what does the Indian competition law allow? I think first of all, we should be very, very clear, and as Robert Bock basically said in his text, Antitrust Paradox, what is the point of the law? What are its goals? Everything else follows from the answer we give. Only when the issue of goals has been settled is it possible to frame a coherent body of substantive rules. Now, having been with lawyers as an economist implementing competition law, my job is to provide that perspective. My job is to see what is the spirit of the law, especially given that the preamble unequivocally states the preamble of a law, and it's important to read that out also for that audience. The establishment of Competition Commission of India in the preamble is prefaced with the phrase, keeping in view of the economic development of the country. I think this is a very unique and unambiguous endorsement of the link between the micro-functioning of individual markets and the larger development imperatives of the country. Having said that, this also is to affirm that competition is not an end in itself, but it is a means to achieve economic goals. And when I'm saying meant to achieve economic goals, which economic goal does this law emphasize? And my understanding is, Ramji may be having a different take on this, my understanding is, given the construct of the law, given the framework for the assessment of cases, that is both section 19.3, which governs agreements, and section 20, subsection 4. I had promised Pradeep that I will not rattle out provisions from the law, but having Ramji on the dais, it enthused me to do that. So 19.3 gives you a framework of analyzing any agreement and see whether or not it has an appreciable adverse effect on competition. And when I look at that framework, and also the framework for merger evaluation, I think the Indian competition law is a very purist law. Purist in the sense that it emphasizes far more efficiency than redistribution. So in that sense, I accept, and also coming from an economics background, having taught economics at the undergraduate level, advanced courses in microeconomics, the first thing which comes to my mind is also what was stated by a professor prior to me, is the second theorem of welfare economics, and which is a good guide for establishing the objectives of Indian competition law. And more so in India, and I'll tell you the reason why it is a little, we have to be a little careful in mixing up objectives, because the old regime, the MRTP regime, had a very malleable construct vis-a-vis the word public interest. And once that word public interest was put in the erstwhile law, it was interpreted in all very which way, compromising on efficiencies, compromising on the basic objective of the law. And this modern competition law in India was in fact therefore a reform on the old law, and brought in efficiency goals explicitly in the sections of the Act which we use in order to determine whether or not a particular conduct is causing an appreciable adverse effect on competition. So coming back to the second theorem of welfare economics, the implication of the theorem is that the problem of distribution and efficiency can be separated. I know you may say this is highly simplistic, but my point is that the competition authority in India should endeavor to maintain that kind of, not a chasm, so to speak, but to maintain a distinction between attaining efficiency goals over and above redistribution goals. Because let the markets perform what they're best in doing, they're performing their allocated functions, where prices are determined in a competitive economic system, indicating relative scarcity. A problem with admitting alternative goals, and more so in India, as I said, because we have had a long history, economic history, of introducing various market distortions into the well-functioning of market economy in the name of the poor, and neither did those distortions serve the poor, nor did they serve the economic growth and development objectives. So a problem with admitting alternative goals is that the resulting framework becomes very less robust. So we have got a chance now that we have a robust framework. We have a very robust and a modern competition law. We have a law which is extremely purist. Let's try and experiment with that and see. And as the professor also said, that efficiency goal is not a mean goal in itself. It's not antithetical so much so to distribution. You can bring in distribution objectives through the welfare standard you adopt in various cases. Mergers, it is very, very clear that we do have a total welfare standards, because relative advantage by way of contribution to economic development outweighing the impact of combination. So we can overlook competitive harm as long as it is contributing to economic development. And hence, let us give this purist law a chance, and let us not mix it up with the objectives which may be secondary to the main objective.
Now the question is not whether the Indian competition law as it is should be given a chance. It of course is being given a chance, because we are not here to change the law. But at the same time, I think there is a contradiction in what you say, Payal, because if efficiency is going to be the prime mover of the competition law, and I'm not talking
One of the fundamental functions of any regulator is to inform the government when it's coming up with the policies which are supporting its own economic agenda. So as regulators, we have to look at ourselves. Why have we not impressed our government so that they can approach us to inform us as we are trying to achieve this? And I can give the example of Kenya. When Uber was coming into the market, is that the traditional players were up in arms, blocking the roads. And it became a state security they were about to block Uber into entering the country. And the Minister for State Security wanted to make a declaration. And I took my call, I called him, and I told him that I would like to inform this process and inform the task force in regard to how to ensure that when Uber comes into the market, there's efficient competition, but also is that we have to ensure that it does not cannibalize the traditional taxi drivers. He formed a task force, and we were the people who were chairing this task force. And what happened is that we came up with a framework for Uber to come into the market. And 1.5 years Uber has come into the market, we have seen 4,000 taxi drivers in the whole of Kenya through Uber. We have seen the reduction of prices of taxis by 300% in the major cities in Kenya. And also we have seen these days taxi is not the preserve of the rich. It can be used by even the poor to get transport. And also personally, I'm comfortable because my son these days does not disturb me, telling me drop me here and there. Anybody can enter into the Uber. And this is part and parcel of the inclusive growth and seeing that each and every person in the society can be able to enjoy this kind of services. Number two, I've seen in the agriculture sector, especially the tea sector, where the sector regulator had put, or the Minister of Agriculture had put a clause that if you want to grow tea and process tea, is that the incumbent had to give a consent, and you had to have minimum acreage to process tea. Then some small-scale farmers in a certain region of Kenya wanted to grow specialty tea, this purple tea and all that. It was a new product. And the incumbents said, no, you don't have at least 30 acres to process this specialty tea. And they came down to the Competition Authority. And we engaged the Minister of Agriculture. We engaged the sector regulator. And they allowed these small-scale farmers to join hands and start processing the specialty tea. What have we seen after about 4 years? 4 entrants into the market of specialty tea, employing 250 direct employees. The prices of specialty tea has increased by 600% to the black tea, the traditional black tea. And this to the poor, those small-scale farmers. What did the Competition Authority do? It's just to advise for the removal of those clauses. It's unfortunate that most of the anti-competitive or the clauses which are barring competition in the market, they have been started by the government itself. And we have to appreciate that. What we have done as a Competition Authority, we have done a sector of what I refer to as the sectors which have the greatest impact to the poor and also the drivers of the economy. We did a study and we have highlighted. We have shared with the government and we have been working with the Treasury towards removing those obstacles to competition. The current Big Four agenda of the current government, it's manufacturing, universal health care for all Kenyans. Number 3, housing. Number 4 is food security. At the start of this 4 big agenda, the government wrote to us and told us, how can we help us achieve this Big 4 agenda? And we have come up with raft of intervention, especially the housing sector. Can you remove can you ensure that there are rules to ensure the professional fees are going down because of the conveyance? In the health sector, we have been told to help the government come up with a leasing framework, especially for the leasing of the health equipment. So, in conclusion, is that I would like to say is that show your government what you are doing. Show your government what you can do to help them achieve their key economic agenda. And at the end of every year, show evidence-based, that is the impact assessment, to show that the benefits, it's not just the penalties. You have penalized the infractors of the law, the people who have infringed the law, but the benefits to the consumer. Therefore, the question I would like to ask, should competition agencies be led by lawyers, or they should be led by economists who can be able to bring out evidential information on the benefit of whatever we are doing in the economy? Thank you.
Well, that also then points to the fact that whether enforcement is better if the economists head the competition commission or lawyers do. Would you like to come in here, because you are a lawyer, maybe you'll have a counterpoint to that.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, Mr. Mehta and Katz, for inviting us to this very interesting debate. And I find that despite the fact that our chairman expressed some apprehension about it being the last session, but I find that there is so much active participation today also. It may not be only because the subject itself is so vast and consuming, but also because of the nature of the widespread participation of such eminent people. To having said those safe words, let me get back to the more controversial ones, which is what I'm used to most of the time, to pick up a gauntlet, so to speak. My take from having seen competition commission and the competition agencies that work in India over the last 9 years, so to speak, almost 20th May 2009. We had something before that, but almost a decade, short of a decade, is that it was okay for us to call our commission a young agency sometime back, and I don't think that we should say that anymore. We are now getting into our teens almost, which is what we will. But we didn't have to reinvent the wheel in a large number of ways. But as Payal mentioned, our preamble and our act actually talks about the reason for our law, the statute, is to promote economic development in the Indian context. And as the chairperson mentioned, that we have a vast, the figures of inequality are really quite staggering. It is in this context that I've noticed, my one view over the last 9 years has been that the commission in India, the competition agencies, have sort of found their way around, tested the waters, found what is possible, what is not possible, having been tested by the legal hierarchy going up in appeals, etc., and some contours having been drawn up. But now is possibly the time for the commission to step up and say, we will take up the big ticket cases, the ones that have the maximum impact on our economy, on our societal and socio-economic fabric, so to speak. As with any other, our litigation, our process is such that statute provides that anybody can go and file an information, and usually it's competitors in the market who go about complaining against each other in a veiled sort of way, and then, it gets to be a litigation, adversarial sort of a litigation before the commission. And that was never intended. Our policy, our framework was never intended this to be an adversarial sort of and therefore lawyers have a great time before the commission. And I've had some great time also, and I must confess. But I think we have a great pattern in which we have administrators with experience of administration in the government. We have economists, and we have two of them here who are participants in the competition process, and Professor Gauri, Gita Gauri, has been one of the founder members of the commission with great elan, and Payal continues to steer where Professor Gauri left off. But I think I don't see any tension between lawyers and economists. I think both of them are needed, and I think that balance is extremely important, because sometimes we tend to agree with what the economists, we use economists a lot to buttress our point and to understand the other side's point also. And likewise, I think economists value the fact that lawyers can bring a perspective which is not usually acknowledged, but it is that lawyers do tend to bring some value to the table, whichever side they are on. The Commission is beginning to realize that also. So the only thing is, for example, but the Commission doesn't allow economist reports to be brought in as expert evidence. That is unfortunate. And I think that is very, very important, because it brings in a different perspective from an economic perspective, and not just, and I would rather, this is much against what a lot of lawyers would support me, and I find thankfully there aren't many lawyers here, and I can safely say that I think that the Commission should allow greater expanse of information that comes to it. Stick to now is the time for it to say, we've hit the headlines enough with penalties, etc. We've made our mark, but we have to now take the big ticket matters and work on it more efficiently with attention to great detail, because a lot of time was spent in the last 5 years overturning Commission's decisions only on procedure. And that happens again because they are tripped on procedure, and you know, they think there is no need to comply with certain procedural requirements. In India, Indian courts are very, very strict on that. So while we continue our discussions, but I think at this moment, to support what the topic is really about, inclusiveness, let the Commission and our agency take up the big matters. It doesn't really matter if you take more time on it, but I think you should do and come with decisions which impact larger sections of our society.
And not have an entry barrier take on this.
Yeah, so, Mr. Sesi, would you like to say something?
Thank you. I'm going to share our experience in the House. Like Francis said, we are new. Our Competition Act was passed in 2007. We became operational in 2009. But unlike Francis, we have two mandates. Unlike Francis, we have a dual mandate. I'd like to share our experience in the House. But, like I said, like Francis, we are new. Our act was passed in 2007. We became operational in 2009. But we have a dual mandate of competition and consumer protection. So we have a tribunal at the same time. I agree with all the speakers that to achieve inclusive growth, the law and policy must be designed taking into context the economic, social, and environmental circumstances of a country, and that prioritization is crucial. 2 years ago, we did a market study in tourism. We found out so many things. Let me just start by saying that tourism is very important in the Gambia. It's 27% of GDP, prioritization. Like, we found out so many things, but on the structure, we operate what we call a tour operator-driven tourism, which means that overseas tour operators are essentially in charge of everything. We found out some core competition issues, of course, exclusivity and all the like. But the most important finding that we found out was that the benefits of tourism is not inclusive. It's not filtering to the populace. I should also give you a context. Gambia, I don't know if you know about Gambia, but we are coming from 23 years of dictatorship. We've had the same guy for 23 years. He was voted out last year, so things are happening and everybody is enthused and we want to do things right. Anyway, but like I said, we found out that the benefits do not trickle to the local, to the masses. We have 48% poverty. We did a study that proved that 70 cents of every dollar spent in tourism actually leaves the country. That's very, very high. So we, like I said, in addition to the core competition issues, we did a policy note on what we think should be done. So we came up with this idea that we borrowed from Seychelles, but we had to refine it in such a way that it fits our solution. That we're not linking tourism to other sectors, agriculture, to the other productive sectors. There's a lot of incentives that government gives out in tourism, so we decided that we're going to link these tourism incentives to local sourcing. So essentially what we have going on right now is that to get your incentives, you have to show evidence of domestic sourcing. So there is actually an official at the Ministry of Finance whose job actually is just to verify invoices to make sure that it's actually happening. It's piloted, it's work in progress, but we've already seen the results of it. There's an association called ASSETS, Association of Small-Scale Enterprises in Tourism, that is working with us, and they're promoting this concept called Gambia is Good, buying Gambian products for the sector. Another thing that we found out too, like I said, is tour operator-driven tourism. Locals are not benefiting.
we decided that to introduce competition, we introduced a new category called Category B tour operators, which is essentially made up of local tour operators, but we force you to partner with them. So the Category B tour operators will be in charge of excursions and the like, so that at least you have, it trickles down to everybody in the sector. I'll just stop there for now, and I'll share our other experience in. We're also reforming the procurement rules to make it more inclusive, but if time permits, I'll share that experience with you too. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So now can we come to Ms. Gauri to tell us, in the light of the presentations that we have heard now, a presentation or discussion that has gone on, this whole issue about efficiency and equity seems still unresolved. Because whereas it is important to continue to focus on efficiency, so that without efficiency, the pie will not increase, and if the pie doesn't increase, inclusiveness is a problem. But left to itself, just increasing efficiency also is increasing inequality, as we are seeing in the world today. I mean, whether it's in India or abroad, you can see in the last 10 years, for instance, inequality has grown exponentially, while efficiency and productivity have also gone up. So, as a person who has sat on the Competition Commission, but also with an economics background, how do you see this going forward?
I'm like the closing inverted comma. Thank you, and that just gives me 5 minutes before we're supposed to close up. But you've raised a very, very valid point. And what I had noticed right from the morning, afternoon, in fact, when I've been hearing is, there's a lot of generalizations. And I am a little uncomfortable because they sound very good. No doubt there's been a lot of inequality, and at least in India, the reason why the middle class has not been able to get much more of the GDP or the benefits of the rise is because of sectors like education and health, which we pay very heavily for. But getting back to what I think is important from all of us here is this question of the fact, and to take off from where Paya left and the purity of the law and what Ramji says, economists don't come in. So let me try and give you a little bit of the feel and my discomfort, and it's very important to take a very nuanced approach because each area is different. And when we talk of efficiency and equity and how does the commission come in, it also depends on which sector you're looking at and how it's handled. Now, the Act is very agnostic. Anyone can put up a case and say, this is anti-competitive. And of course, our most popular person who's come is one Shamsher Kataria. I don't know who he is. But he has come up with different cases, but none of them deal with sectors that could have some impact. So we have a mixed case. And in the commission, what has been happening in this mixed case of things that have been coming up, a large proportion of the cases, our Shamsher Katarias, are all for competitors. And the sad part of it, they are seeking protection, which is an argument which is very nationalist. They're not wanting to compete, you see? And then when you say you don't want them to compete, we have gone against the preamble. We're protecting competitors and not protecting competition in certain sectors. In some of the cases that I have looked at and I have been continuously arguing about, because it's very easy in any of them to go into it. And now we're in the stage of the internet, the high technology, where dominance is preeminent. But when you're wanting to look at who benefits, who is going to gain, no economic analysis has been done so far. So when they say it is efficiency, the decision often has been more equity biased unless you happen to take a minority decision which doesn't have any effect at all. Because the economic analysis is very, very difficult. That means that it is very difficult for the Competition Commission to do that kind of economic analysis which would prove that inclusiveness is coming, I'm so glad you've said this about Gambia and looked at it, but that's in the tourism sector. But in the sectors which I don't want to name, there has been this issue, who has benefited? The competitor. And the phrase I use is, like earlier before the liberalization came, now they use the Competition Commission shoulders to fire at competition. They don't want to compete. Who loses? It's the common man, the consumer. And on all these aspects of it, it's not only the consumer, but it's the startups. They're the ones who are getting lost out. Then the question then comes up is, why competition? Who is gaining? We moved away from MRTP because it was a structuralist thing to competition. But are we again getting sucked into this sort of thing with not enough about on efficiency? But they're different cases. They're very interesting cases. There's some cases, Chairman mentioned Coal India, which was extremely progressive, sent back for the sake of procedure, but not looked at what is the outcome. So you have to look at impact assessment, and that's not being done. But there have been cases which we haven't been able to push through. The most famous one, which I have been going on and on, is on the APMC. We took up the first case on the onion market. It was a cartel. It was a case of a feudal market. It was a case where we could get no data. We're starting from the first primary auction at the level, which is the first Mandi, the traders who are more or less related to one another physically, materially, and through marriage, had the way through. We couldn't break through because there was not enough data that the commission could pass an order. It was before Payal's time. We fought and fought for the onion case. The APMC is one of the most regressive things, but that was an order that couldn't be passed. The point here is it APMC alone? Is it a question of modernizing? Is it a question of digitalization? Because data becomes important. Then can the commission only do so much or not advise the government? And I think the commission is now going forward in a lot of cases in terms of advising the government. So what I'm trying to say is that here, when you look at India, it's not a transition from a government regulated to an open market, but they're also feudal markets. They're transitional, traditional markets, which control. That has to be broken up. It's a long time that will take place. Since I have to finish very quickly, I'm not going to take other ones about it. But I want to bring up a point. When you find that the competition law itself has to be more open, and it should go on the basis of an effects-based approach rather than a per se, I find we're going more and more into per se and a form-based approach. So the competition law itself has to be more expansive and more immanent. Now, if you have to be more expansive, and in India, we have different kinds of laws, we have different policies, and the government set up the competition policy with a certain objective. Let's not go back to thinking of protection, which is in a nationalist framework. You do need protection. The startups need protection. And the competition law should be to look at what are the outcomes. And the suggestion I make is that since we are in a different paradigm altogether, the competition law should function on two pedestals: incentives, liabilities. On whom does the incentive fall and on whom the liabilities? That exercise is extremely difficult, and if it's not done, the way we go is we create more distortions by trying to bring in some vague concept of equity rather than just staying with efficiency. It's necessary to have clarity. I see this beautiful girl raising her red flag, and she has allowed all the other men much longer time, so she is not gender equal. But I agree with you, it's time to shut up. And again, on the topic of competition law versus competition policy, I think in India, enforcement is more important. I have held this view, and let us not generalize. Each country is different.
But then there's this very important issue that you have raised, which is asymmetrical access to information. If the Competition Commission itself has not been able to find, for instance, in the case of onion cartons, relevant data to be able to pass a reasoned order. Obviously, if we begin to look at more and more sectors, we will find that the same situation is in other sectors too. Now,
This probability is not based on evidence, and I think now the Commission will have to start looking at this, because evidence very often may be just slim. The regulator is always afraid to take that jump. You see, it's that 80-20. I am convinced 80, but the outlier 20 will not let you make a type 1 error. If you take 80, you make a type 1 error. So I agree with you. There are lots of complications. And I think the economics department and division has only 2 people or 3 people. I mean, have a heart for them.
Payal, what do you have to say to this?
While data is very important, the problem has been that in mergers, the parties are giving us excellent data. Of course, the role of the Commission is then the validation and due diligence, as Ms. Gauri has pointed out. Secondly, in fact, some of the enforcement dictats have gone the wrong way, in the sense that they have led to non-collection of data, because there were these associations which were collecting data and were a good repository of data. What we had to tell them was not to discuss data, but to collect ex post data through those associations may not be a wrong way to do that in order to give us rich data for sectoral data. Third, the Department of DIPP, in the sense, is now should get into data collection at a very, very granular level, because the kind of data which we require is extremely granular, which these macro data agencies such as the CMIE, etc., cannot help us to do that. Finally, given the importance of data, given the limitations of data not being available, the Commission is aware of that and has now started a process of empaneling agencies precisely for collection of data, of short kind of a quick surveys to be conducted if there is some kind of an ambiguity vis-a-vis even simple things like market shares, simple things like consumer preferences, because consumer preferences will be at the heart of definition of the market. That's point number 1. And point number 2, regarding just a little few points which came out from the discussion, and I'll just take 2 minutes. I'm not saying that prioritization is not important, and you can use the instrument of competition law by prioritizing those sectors which affect or harm the poor. So that's very well. One example being the onion market and the agriculture markets. What my point is that you cannot use the instrument of the law for creating level playing fields so you don't have to, this law is not there to protect inefficient firms. This law is not there to promote national champions and to protect Indian domestic firms from foreign competition. And so the confusion should not be there about the instrumentality, what you can do in order to bring it into a more quote-unquote inclusive development, though I think the topic is more regarding economic development, is to prioritize that way. And finally, I think Sumit is there, and he spoke about India is still very far away from the efficiency frontier. And if this law and the instrumentality of the law can bring us closer to that efficiency frontier, I think this law has done a great service amongst the panoply of laws and the arsenal of laws which are available for fulfilling other distribution objectives. And that's my point, that in fact the big ticket item is not so much enforcement, the big ticket item is the advocacy. Because again and again we are feeling that the competition law can just do only that much. There are so many infirmities in the markets due to weak contract laws, due to government directly involved in economic activities, government ownership, etc. And that is the way to go forward, that is to have effective advocacy with enforcement, limited enforcement, but also effective enforcement, which can change the contours of the economy.
Like just a quick one to take up from where she's left, which is this. In one word, I would say that we need to have a competition policy. We've not had a competition policy. And that, to a large extent, will solve much of the problems about data collection. if we had an overarching policy which said government departments must do it in such a way, procurement policies must be devised in a particular way, tenders and bids must be provided in a particular way, each of the commercial activities done by government sectors, public sectors, etc., must have certain data that they must collect and keep. And therefore, there is intelligence that the economic departments of governments, or each of those departments also have, that must. So therefore, that takes away from the sting, like Paul rightly mentioned. We've had problems. I've had problems defending associations because, or in corporates, cement, for example. The DIPP asks cement and the Association of the Cement to collect data for the purposes of figuring out, is there growth? Is there infrastructural growth? Is there no growth? What is the progress? If they collected data, then where will they collect the data from? The members. The moment they collect data, well, there's a possibility you met together, this, that, whatever else. So therefore, that's a very rife possibilities of a cartelization because you're exchanging, you're asking for information. So this will take away, to a large extent, if the government-appointed agencies or independent agencies were to carry. There will always be that danger about information exchange or sharing. But you need to be able to bridge that if you had a policy, an overarching policy. And I think, therefore, that is extremely important. For some reason, we've not progressed forward on that.
Chairman, before you take the last word.
Just one more. You wanted to say something? No, you wanted to say something?
I think what is coming out, and I take it from Payana, whatever she's saying, is we cannot instrumentalize each and everything we are doing. You know, from the Kenyan point of view, I feel that we have a modern law. We have a law which can ensure that we achieve what we want to achieve in terms of also inclusive growth. The key thing is, how do we approach the enforcement? And that is what we are talking about here. And the examples I give in terms of the tea industry and also about the Uber showed that helped achieve the inclusive growth. But as we proceed, there are other emerging issues which are coming up, especially the abuse of buyer power, which we realize in Kenya is that the small medium enterprises, they are owed $380,000 by the big retailers. They have not been paying them for their supplies. And also, when you look at the contract they have with the big retailers, is that you can see that there's quite a lot of abuse of buyer power by the retailers. And when the government sat down and looked, where are we going to place this problem which is facing us, they couldn't agree. There was no convergence of mind. Ministry of Trade was saying that they are the ones who are capable of driving this agenda. But also, they had to create a new state corporation. And that's what the government said. We cannot create a state corporation just to deal with this one issue. So it was agreed that the competition law should be amended and reorganize the structure of the competition authority so that we can deal with this emerging issue, which also may increase, or it's increasing inequality. So some of the issues in regard to competition law, we are dealing with them. But when it comes to emerging issues, I would advocate that we amend the law and also restructure the organization to support the emerging issues.
Yeah, you wanted?
No, I
Okay. You want to say? Very quickly.
Yes, very quickly. So I think the conclusion I would like to get out of this discussion is that one size doesn't fit all, in the sense that first, institutional capabilities matter. And I agree with you, what can be possible for a competition authority which, in a mature competition system that has access to a huge amount of data and evidence, is very different from what can be possible for a competition authority in a recent and a new jurisdiction and with less access to data. Now, the second thing which I think is important is the institutional context, the equilibrium basically that we have in society. I mean, governments, they usually want to maximize stability, social stability. And as I said before, they have to mix efficiency and fairness in order to assure stability. Now, in some cases, competition laws might be considered as only focusing on efficiency because of the institutional capability issue, or because of the fact that there are other very effective mechanisms of redistribution that are available in this particular society, and that's absolutely fine. But it may be that in other societies, these other alternative mechanisms of distribution do not work. And therefore, you might want, in this case, to include in competition law these other objectives. So it's a matter about also the choices that you make concerning the institutional environment that you have. And the amount of inequality that you also might accept. You know, some societies accept more inequality than others before exploding. So that's obviously something that you need to take into account. And the third thing I wanted to say is about redistribution in the second welfare theorem. I mean, that works perfectly on paper. My problem with that is that it assumes that, and if you take out the Hicks efficiency, it assumes that there will be some methods of transfer that will happen at the second stage. Now the problem is that transfer doesn't happen. I mean, the tax system might not necessarily be operating well. And also that, you know, you might not necessarily assume that consumers will, somehow benefit from transfers coming out of progressive taxation, and that is a more, let's say, a better solution to them than having their structural position of bargaining in the economy basically being pushed forward by aggressive competition enforcement. So I think you might also need to think of what will the consumers like, and it's not necessarily that they would prefer to have efficiency with some promise of wealth transfer through taxation that doesn't really occur, right? That I think is important, and the answer to that question might depend, from society to society. It's very different.